Okay, hello and welcome to this tutorial. This will be a beginner-friendly tutorial. I will explain quite a lot, and the techniques here are quite easy to follow, nothing really hard. But I think the effect is quite cool and we go a bit more in depth in the look development. So we start off with a fresh new Houdini scene file. And what we're gonna change is the frame rate to 25 frames per second. I like to work with 25 frames. Then we start off by drawing down a geometry container, hit tab here, type in geometry. And then we can call that setup and we dive in. So we have an empty network here and we press tab and use Alembic. Then we want to load in the Alembic I provide you on my Patreon account, and this is the cup you get, or the geo at least. And if you load in an Alembic, it is packed, so we need to unpack it in order to access the single polygons and to see the UVs. So right now we cannot access the single polygons. This is because we need to convert it into polygons. So, and now I can select the single polygons. Cool, this is exactly the kind of geo we want to work with. And if we compare it to a cube, which is in Houdini scale 1 by 1, and I'd like to say meters, but I know Houdini is scaleless. But just to have a reference, if we say this is 1 meter, then our cup is quite huge, so we need to transform that, and we want to have it something like that in comparison to the box, to our 1 meter box. Cool. So now we can do, before we actually start into any setup, what I like to do with 3D scans or assets, I want to do a real quick material on it. So let's throw down a material and we change here into the material context and create a RS material builder. Let's call that cup, and we're gonna relink this here so it is actually linked and we get a shop material path attribute, prim attribute on it. Cool. If we now open Redshift, render preview, by default you're probably not gonna see much. Oh, there's a tiny cup. So let's actually change the resolution in the camera to something like that. And I like to work with quite high focal lengths. Then we lock the camera and we go much closer until we see something like that. Cool. And the RS default lighting is quite shitty, so let's throw down a dome light. And inside here we're gonna load a texture. I can recommend the HDRIs from Maxime Rotz, especially the Canada Montreal bathroom is quite nice, this one. And you can download them for free actually, or I think for a very low amount of money. But it's worth it. It's, in my opinion, the best HDRIs. So let's disable the background. Let's work a bit on the shader, but at first I want to disable the RS dome light in the viewport. Then we go inside here in the shader and we throw down an RS texture. And inside here we're gonna relink our 3 textures I just provided you. So we go with albedo. Then the next one will be normal. And last but not least, we will having displacement. Okay, so we can push them a bit downwards here, and the first part is I want to use a RS color correct node. I always go with this on the albedo so I can tweak the gamma, contrast, the hue shift, saturation, etc. I think that's quite helpful, so I throw down this very often. Then I want to relink the normal map, so let's get a bump map inside here and link that into the bump map. And we need to change it here into tongue space mode. And let's see what we got so far. It's might taking quite a while because it's processing the textures and they're quite high res. So by default that looks horrible, and if we change that to raw it looks much better. We also gonna change the color space on the displacement, basically on every texture that is not containing color information. You can change the color space to raw. Since the albedo is having the color information, we want to go with the sRGB. Okay, and by default I think the normal is quite high, so let's use something like that. Can maybe go even a bit further so we at least see something. Oh yeah, that's another weird bug. Is it updating? Yeah, something like that could work. 0.2. Then we want to have a bump blender as well. And let's maybe get an ground for this basic setup so we can see better with the bounce light and stuff like that. So let's get another geometry container, call that ground, throw down a grid, and immediately it should update, yeah, to something like that. We can throw down a UV unwrap if we want to. UV unwrap. So we have UVs on the grid. Maybe it can be much smaller, like let's say 2 by 2 or 3 by 3. That is big enough so it covers the whole image. And that looks good so far. So let's go back into the material. And I want to start tweaking the RS color correction. So I want to have it a bit brighter in the level scale. Actually, I want to have much more gamma, so you see more details inside here. I think that's pretty nice. Then we can also relink or link the displacement. Let's get a displacement node down here, pipe it into the texture channel. And inside here we change some parameters. The new range should be from minus 0.5 to 0.5. This results in the displacement not only in positive direction but in positive and negative, because if you only have it into the positive direction, the size of your cup might change, which we don't want. So pipe that up, and I think by default it's not working because we need to enable the displacement here. So let's do that really quick, and also by default that's way too big. So I think something like that is an appropriate scale. I mean, you still can see it. Yeah, I like it very subtle. So let's go with something like that. Let's go back into the material, and I want to do some more adjustments so we can have more details actually in our cup, because I think right now this looks very plain and I'd like to have some bumps and stuff like that going on. And also I want it to be a bit rougher. So I have a reference that I'm following, and you can feel free to look for another reference, but I think that looks quite nice, and I'm gonna try to achieve something like that. I think also it's quite close to our actual cup or to the scanned geo, but I want to have the surface a bit rougher and also more bumps and stuff like that. So how can we achieve that? Um, we can do that by reusing the textures we already have. So let's say we use the albedo map and pipe it into a ramp. And then we use another bump map here. So we have something like that. And we can tweak it. So for example, if we want to see more details, we can push that down here, maybe something like that, and we get all this nice detail. If we now put that into the bump map and pipe that into bump input 1 into the bump blender, nothing changes. So let's get a screenshot, because we also need to activate that in the bump blender. So let's go into additive mode, type here 0.5, and immediately you see something's happening. I think this area looks much more interesting, but the overall the overall bump is way too strong in my opinion. So let's push that back to something like 0.01. So it's a bit more subtle, but we have this nice details there, which I really like. And then we're gonna use another ramp. So let's actually get a screenshot. It's super glossy in some areas, and I want to change that. Let's push that also to somewhere like here, and this bit up. Then we pipe that into the reflection roughness. And you should see that it's actually creating, I mean, if we pipe that inside here, you see that the black areas will be very, very high reflective, and the white areas are more rough. And actually I wanted an overall more rough result, so we can say here maybe 0.1, so we at least have some roughness in every area and it's not 100% glossy. And I still feel it's a bit boring, so what I'm gonna do now is I get another ramp, and I want to drive with that ramp basically the color correction. So let's pipe that in, and here we want something very, very contrasty, maybe something like that. That looks good to me. And we need a RS change range. And what this node does is it actually takes the values from here from 0 to 1, and you can remap these values to a new range. and I want to have a range of 1 and 2, and then we pipe that into the gamma. So right now in the white spots we're gonna have a gamma value of 2, and in the black spots we're gonna have a gamma value of 1. And I think immediately you see we have more contrast, we have more interesting spots here, which I really like. And I want to do the same again. Let's get another ramp. And let's do a bit more crazy stuff with that ramp. Let's maybe get just a very tiny border, something like that. Maybe pushed it somewhere here. Oopsies. And this can be also very contrasty. Then we get another change range. And inside of that change range, we also want something like 0.65 and 1.5. And with that, we're gonna drive the saturation. Let's check. And you see, especially in that areas, we have a lot more variety. But I think overall it looks better. So we started from something like that, and we have something like this right now. In my opinion, quite a big improvement. And this will be our solid base with which we are gonna start off working and creating this Kintsugi effect. And by the way, I don't know if you guys know what Kintsugi is, but I highly recommend Googling it and digging more into that topic. It's very interesting. Kintsugi is a Japanese art style where they don't throw away broken things or broken bowls and ceramics. They actually embrace the breaks or the cracks, and they put some gold inside of it to make it look more interesting. And I really like that that thought that you don't throw away things, but you actually embrace the cracks and their history by showing it with some gold inside of it. And I think this is fake, this is like drawing onto it, but this is really inside of the cracks. And yeah, this is the effect we're gonna go for now. So let's jump back into the geometry level, into our setup, and we can stop rendering right now. And inside here, we're gonna start off by actually subdividing it, because I feel like there's not much resolution right now in the cup. So let's subdivide this by maybe a depth of 2. Stay organized. And then we use a basic pre-fracturing material node. So let's get an RBD material fracture node. And if I select that now, it might take a while because this node is not the fastest. So to actually see it, because right now you don't see it, you can like change to flat wire shaded, and then you see the cracks here. But to see it better, you can use a exploded view. Pipe that inside here and maybe go to something like 0.1, and you immediately can see there is basically already this effect. but we want to do it a bit differently and tweak it. So inside the RBD material fracture, we're gonna go with custom, and we use 10 scatter points, and we want to have some detail going on, because if you go inside here, you see all these edges are quite sharp. I mean, this is also a pretty interesting look. If you want to go for it, you can use it like that. But I want to have some jagged off lines. So let's go into detail and maybe detail size to something like that. Then we enable edge detail. And again, this is not the fastest node. I know a lot of people that are working with RBDs and they're creating their pre-fracturing mask manually, and it's totally fine if you want to do that, but for this tutorial I'm gonna go with this way, and you can change the noise height to something like that, and noise element size to this, and we also want to have an interior detail, and the frequency is quite high. Oopsies. So that should be it. Now it's actually calculating again. Okay, and you should have something like that. This is pretty interesting in my opinion. And I don't know why there's still this sign, but you can ignore it if you also have that. And so right now we gonna select a group, because we don't want the bottom part to be pushed. I think it looks nicer if it's connected. So let's select this pieces, just like that. Yeah, I think that looks good. Let's create a group for that. And now that they're grouped, actually we want the group before the exploded view, we can say $OS. That just means take the name of the node and make it a group name. And we say it's the, I don't know, push group. And inside the exploded view, we're gonna select now the push group. And it was actually the other way around. Okay, and actually I wanted to select the top part for the group. I didn't record it because I think you know how to select it for the group. And now we end up having something like that. And inside the exploded view, I want to change some things here. So I want to have it pushed upwards only, not into every direction. And I want to override the center to minus 0.01. And we go with the uniform scale of 1. So we have bigger gaps, kinda. And that looks good to me. And so after the exploded view, I don't know why there's still this mark. That's a bit annoying. Maybe it's disappearing if we... Oh, it's still there. Warning invalid source. I don't know. It's still working, so I don't care. Let's actually work on the inside pieces now and how we're gonna subtract it. So what is nice about this RBD material fracture, it creates these groups for us, and there's also this inside group which we're gonna use. So let's get a split node. And actually we can stay organized a bit. And inside here we split the inside things from the outside, so we only have these faces. And then we get a poly extrude. So let's say 0.002 is probably more than enough, and this weird shootouts can be fixed by changing the extrusion mode to point normal. So that looks much better, and we do that on the same side into the opposite direction. So we just make sure it's in both directions and we have the edges completely covered. And I want to toggle on output back. So you immediately see that the normals are flipped here. So we get a reverse node to flip the normals back again. Then we get a remesh for both. And inside the remesh, we need a quite low value. So something like that will work. It might take a while to calculate, but that's worth it. And we also do that for the same part, for the opposite part. Then we get a mountain sub to distort it a bit. And that's by default way too big. So let's say something like that. And we also want to have a smaller element size. So we have a distortion that's like this. I think that's completely fine. And also on the other side, then we get a merge node and merge these together again. So, and now we start working with VDBs or volumes. I don't know your background. If you're from Cinema 4D, I think it's volume builder, volume measure. Here it's called VDB from polygons. And if you throw that down, you probably see nothing at first because the voxel size is way too big. So we want something like that. That might take a while, but it calculates us a quite high res and dense volume out of it. Then we're gonna get a VDB smooth SDF. And inside here, we can smooth that by, let's say, 10 iterations. And if we might lose some details, we can get a VDB reshape SDF to make it a bit bigger before we smooth it. So let's say we're gonna dilate that by 2 before we smooth that. It should have the overall same volume like here, maybe even a bit bigger, but smoothed. Then what we're gonna do now is we also want to have a VDB from polygons from this pieces here. So let's select that. And now if you take a closer look, I mean it's hard to see here, but you have some overshootings going on and we don't want to have that. So we need a VDB combine. And if we combine these both VDBs, we can subtract this one from this one. So let's say it's a bit weird inside here. You're not taking the subtract thing, but you need the SDF difference. And that actually works quite well. Oh, whoopsies. Cool. So now we have the subtracted one. Then we want, okay, then we have another piece. So if we now basically convert that, so let's say convert VDB, and let's see what it looks like. And we say polygons. It is by default quite dense, but that's fine. And if we merge that together with our initial exploded view, you will see it's covering all these cracks completely, and it's also going over the edge. That looks a bit messy and not so clean like on the reference. I think this is, we kind of want a bit overshoot, and we also want to feel that there's a crack. In my opinion, right now it looks like it's just some dirt on the piece itself. So how can we achieve that effect? And let's basically go into the subdivide. Let's create another point here. And then we get an edit node. So at first, let's create another. So we're call that, I don't know, cup out. Go into right viewport, and then we're gonna select it like that. And by default, it's horribly selected. So I go inside here, hold down Shift, A, and middle mouse button, so I can select these rings. And since it's quite a nice topology, that works fine. So then we use an edit node, and it immediately recognized our selection. And inside the edit node, I want to push that a bit up to somewhere until it basically covers our exploded view. So let's see, I think somewhere around here. I think that works fine. So before that, you see, because we're pushing it upwards, it's cut off here, but we want to have the full exploded view covered. So it's like that, and that works fine. So let's get a VDB from polygons from that as well. VDB from polygons. And what we can do now after this VDB combine, we can basically get another, put that inside here, and we now subtract from this, but that's looking weird now. So we now only have the dirt on the outside, and we can change that by changing the operation mode to SDF intersection. And now we only have the part that is also inside here. And so that it feels a bit more organic in the end, I'm gonna use a VDB smooth SDF again. So let's put that inside here, and we also get rid of this weird voxels that are just flying around. So you see they immediately disappear. And on this one, we want to go quite high. So let's say 30, and also mean curvature flow. So mean curvature flow keeps actually the geo, or tries to keep the geo, but smooths the edges. So let's see what we get now. I think that looks much better. You see still some edges, and you see in some areas it's not completely inside of it, but in other areas it feels like it's covered very nicely. So let's go back into camera 1 and let's actually try to render that and see what it looks like. But at first we can also adjust our camera a bit. So maybe something like that. I think our camera is slightly rotated. Yeah. Okay, never mind. Yeah, that looks good. Let's get a render out of it and maybe let's make the ground even bigger. Oh, come on. Okay, and let's render that. Open render view. So this is from before. And this is what it looks now. I think it's quite nice. And you see there, you can still see the cracks and there's something inside it, which feels quite good to me. Okay, and now we can work on the shader for this one. Let's create another material, RS material builder, and maybe call that gold. Go back into the setup and let's create a RS material, and we can relink the gold material. Okay, some small adjustments. I want to introduce a bouquet, and for that just make sure you're inside here and your focus is about the right distance. So let's go back into my camera. That works fine. Then I load it in image. You can actually find these by searching for bouquet maps, and I think Grayscale Gorilla has quite some nice ones. And then I changed that to unit intensity. And actually the next thing I want to do, and I really like to work with these, is to change it to filmic. That makes everything darker, but we can tweak that by increasing the light to something like 10. And now we can work finally on this shader. So let's go into that shader. Let's see if it's linked. And that looks good. So the first thing I want to do inside here is create an old material, because on the old materials, not on the RS standard material, but only on the material, you have these presets, and I think they're quite a solid start. So let's select gold and pipe that into here, and that already looks quite good, but we need to do some changes to it. So let's actually start off with an Maxon noise, and we will use that on the bump map, but we will actually stack a few Maxon noises. So let's get a bump map and a bump blender and connect this here. And inside the first Maxon noise, I want to have an overall scale of 0.0025, which is quite small. You can always check the noise size by piping it inside there. And then I want to pipe that into the bump map and then actually into the bump input. Let's see what that looks like. By default, way too strong, so let's dial that back to something like that. It's barely visible, but it's still there. Then I want to create another Maxon noise and another one, so we have two of them. And in the first one I want to go with, let's say, wavy turbulence and also something very small like that. And inside here we're going to change the contrasts. And here note, if you want to like animate the overall piece and move it around and stuff like that, you need UVs on it and you need to change the mode to UV. But since that will be a static one for me, I'm gonna keep it on object, but just something to keep in mind when you're shading it. And let's actually check the Maxon noise here. I want to go with fire, and I want to change the input to an overall scale of that. And also, and that's fine. So let's get a iris color composite, pipe that both inside of here. And in the iris color composite, I want to use subtract. So let's check that. That looks like this. And without the subtraction, you basically have a bit more noise. So it looks a bit more patchy. Let's say it like that. And one last Maxon noise, but we gonna use that later. So let's get a bump map. And inside of that bump map, it also will be very small, something like that. Let's pipe that into the bump blender. And we need to change some settings in the bump blender, just like that. Let's see what we got. I think it already looks a bit more interesting and more organic, but I feel like the overall noise is like too even, too regular. So let's break that a bit up with the last Maxon noise. And inside here, we want to go with a basic noise, and we want to change the overall scale to also something quite low, and change some things here. I want to have a low clip of 0.2 and contrast of 0.5. Let's get a color composite node. Let's actually get a screenshot first, pipe that in, and I want to use multiply this time. And we also want to use the same here. So this is our shader with which we can regulate where is actually bump happening. And you see right now we have some spots where no bump is, there's no bump at all. But I want some bump at least, but not in all areas. And we can achieve that by basically getting something like that inside of it. So because it's multiplying, and if you have a value of 0, everything multiplied by 0 is 0. And if we have a very small value by 0.2, we at least have something happening here. But we have these areas where it's yeah, actually a lot smoother in some areas, and this looks very organic to me. Not so even, not an even pattern, but we have some breakups like here So yeah, I think that's quite cool. And now I wanna change the overall color of it because I think that looks a bit CG, that yellowish color compared to our reference picture. Let's actually check the reference. Ah, there it is. You see, it's a lot more orangey, and I want to get that in. So how to do that? I want to use an Fresnel for that and a ramp. Let's pipe that in and change the ramp to something like that. Let's actually check the Fresnel for now. And I think we need to reload our scene so we can see it. Let's pray that Redshift doesn't crash. Thank God you heard my prayers. So we want to change the index of refraction to 0.8 and the extinction coefficient to something like that. And now we want to pipe that into reflection reflectivity. And by default, it will look also quite interesting, but not the effect we're going for. So we need to dial in some colors, and I found out these values work quite well for me, but feel free experimenting with these. So it's a bit more desaturated here and a kind of the same color but more saturated on the outside. And then also I want to change the metal edge tint to something like that, maybe even a bit more reddish. That kind of works good. And last but not least, I want to use that combined with the ramp. Oh, not flakes, but our noise pattern we created down here with a ramp. And I want to drive the reflection roughness with that. So, and on the left spot, I don't want to have it on full black, but let's say 0.3. Yeah, I think that works much better. We have a bit more of a color like that. Cool, so this is our final asset and our first part. And in the next part, we gonna create some environment for it and create some dope style frames or R&D renders. You very often need to do this in a studio when the first time the project comes up and the studio is looking for a right look and feel or environment for the asset to be in. So yeah, see you in the next part. Cheers.